Well, good afternoon, wherever you are, and welcome to Tuesdays for Teachers for April. Today, we are going to spend some time talking about one of our favorite subjects for the PD team, graphic organizing. I'm Daphne Atkinson from GED Testing Service. I'm joined on the line by Susan Pittman, one of our consultants who will be co-presenting with us this afternoon. All of you know us, and we're really excited to bring this webinar to you and really say a big, hearty thank you to you for joining us this afternoon. Let's talk a little bit about what the session objectives are. One of the things that we know is that there's been a lot of research about the use of graphic organizers. And they are not only supportive of whatever curriculum you're using, but can also improve student achievement. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. Second, we're going to explore some very different graphic organizers that many of you have already seen because most of you have come to some of the professional development that we've offered. And then third, we'll distinguish when and how to use the various types of graphic organizers. And of course, as we always try to do, we'll share some resources. Okay, Susan.
All right.
What about graphic organizers and their relationship to the curriculum?
Well, we're going to talk about how this can be such an effective tool to use in the classroom. And, I know that people have different opinions about graphic organizers, but what we see and what the research is telling us is that the graphic organizer can be highly effective, especially for our adults as we're working in our program. And of course, all of us, what we're looking for is for success with those students who are out there. So keep that in mind as we move through, and just maybe we'll share some graphic organizers with you that you'll think, I think that might make a difference in my class. So let's talk first about what is a graphic organizer. And it's really a visual display, not just a graphic, but a visual display where we can see relationships between facts and terms and ideas. I mean, those are things that are so important because most of our students who are out there, I shouldn't say most, many of our students who are out there, they have trouble identifying how certain things are related. And we know on the GED test, it's very important for students to see those relationships. And especially, we get into RLA and we have the extended response, and that relationships is a big factor as we're working through there. But that's also true working through a number of different ones. So if you look on the left-hand side, you'll see a lot of different types of graphic organizers. And we're going to talk about different ones because what we have to know is, okay, which one should we use as we're working through different things? So sometimes we need that cyclical type of process. We need that. It's going to show a process. It's going to show that cycle of how things are done. Hierarchical may be something else that we need, where it kind of rotates between a concept and the different levels that you're going to see within those. Sometimes we need something that can deal with a concept. So how that concept is actually supported by maybe facts or evidence, characteristics. And of course, the one that we often use, in fact, maybe for some of the easiest things for some of our students, is that sequential, where you have that chronological order of events. And those of you who were with us for the last Tuesdays for Teachers, we talked about sequence, and we talked about how important that is across many different areas. And so you think in terms of how can I use that type of thing. So there is a tremendous amount of research that's out there, some of it dating back a long way, about how important these things can be. Um, the research is very clear that the use of graphic organizers actually improves student learning because you're presenting things in both the text and that graphic or pictorial format. And that's one of the things that allows that information to be a lot more accessible to a lot of learners. When we start talking about universal design for learning, graphic organizers fit the bill perfectly in that. And so much of the research has shown how these graphic organizers can make a difference, not just for, students in general, but think about your students who may have some learning disabilities and how that can help them as they're moving through. So, why are they so effective? Well, it allows students to understand more complex ideas. But even more than that, they begin to remember those things for a longer period of time because they have a way in which to associate things. They can see it and what all is going on. So we can move from the abstract into the concrete. And also for many students who they're not like I am, which I'm very much a read write learner, where I do take a lot of my information from the written text that's there, written, and move it into more visual so they can get that picture of what we're trying to convey. Those are important things. But there's other reasons too, because what we're able to do with a graphic organizer is we can kind of chunk information. And if we can do that, it makes it easier for us to remember, but also it helps us begin to understand processes and how things work. So keep all of these things in mind as we're moving through, because what we're trying to do is look at it in a way where students, can construct a response. They using a graphic organizer targets that higher order thinking skills that we want our students to have. And you know as well as I do, we want to have our students build those analytical, those critical and creative thinking skills, not just in one area, but across all those academic areas. But I think it even goes further than that into how we can use those skills as we're moving past the GED and on into higher ed and training, or maybe we're moving on into the workplace. But we really have to target in, because all of us talk about how our students need those higher order thinking skills. So the other thing that helps us is that it's a scaffolded approach, and it can help keep students on track. It also, if you think about a graphic organizer, you can't put, although some students will try to, you can't put every piece of information in there. So you've got to reduce that information down. And that helps in terms of processing. And then last but not least, we have to engage students. So using a graphic organizer can be such an effective tool when students are reading, so that they're engaging with the text and completing information as they're going through. Now, that paints a pretty nice picture of working with graphic organizers, but there are some negatives in all of this. And sometimes it may be true of us as teachers, it may be as true of students who are out there. Oh no, this is just one more thing that I have to do. We have to make sure that students don't view that as some add-on thing, but it's an integral part of what we're doing. And it can be time consuming for us in creating an answer key. What do we want to see from students when they're creating these? We want to have some general ideas of what we expect students to do. And we can use them incorrectly. We need to make sure that we've matched what we're trying to teach with an appropriate type of graphic organizer.
Mhm.
can be stressful, and especially for some students who may have difficulty in getting started with this process. Maybe in some ways they're like I am when it comes to writing an outline. I never was very strong at writing outlines. Some students have difficulty in learning how to effectively use a graphic organizer. Now, we know that note taking it's important. It's an important skill for students to have. So this can impact, but at the same time, what we're hoping is that we can have a positive impact as we're moving through. And for some people, it may be seen as well, that just takes all the creativity out of this. So, why am I going to do those types of things? So that just gives you a little of the pros and the cons as we're working through this. But Daphne, how about talking to us a little bit about when a person should use those graphic organizers? When would a teacher put these things into place?
Well, actually, there are a number of places that you could use them. The first place that comes to mind is before you start exposing students to a new topic, in order to get them thinking in the vein of that topic. You can also use them during instruction, because as you commented, it can help students process information. And as you were talking, I was thinking about the fact that some students think every morsel of information on a page is important. A graphic organizer can help them begin to filter the information during instruction and begin to prioritize the things like the big ideas versus the minute details. And then afterwards, they can be used as, believe it or not, a very effective diagnostic, because you can actually see by viewing the graphic organizers where students are hitting the mark and where students maybe missed an essential part of the concept. So that's where I would go with this. There are a number of advantages to graphic organizers for instructors. One is it's a reference, because it can keep you on track as an instructor, and insist and help you insert interactivity to ensure that students are not only getting the concept but can actually utilize it. It structures the lesson in a way that makes sense to students. And, one of the findings on the GED testing service side of the research is that students often lack familiarity with a structured approach to things, whether it's problem solving, getting organized from a fact and evidence perspective to write a constructive response. So that's, an enormous benefit. Again, as I said earlier, it helps with assessing where they are. Susan.
Yeah.
So
Sorry.
let's. Well, that's like okay. And again, that last one. Just want to spend a minute there.
Okay.
It gives you a window as instructors on a student's thinking process. And you can look at that from a group perspective or an individual perspective. And it may also give you some very important clues as to where you need to go next with instruction. Okay, Susan. So what about the how-to part? You want to tackle that?
Sure, I'll be glad to. And I apologize for my mouse is a little jumpy over here today, and so we kind of jumped ahead a little bit. But but for those of you, as you're thinking about all this, and if you want to learn more about these types of things, what we have here and how to use those graphic organizers really comes from some work by Robert Marzano. and really dealing with classroom instructions that work. And these are all very much research based, which is something that we want to always do. So if you're going to use a graphic organizer, well, first of all, you need to know the graphic organizer yourself. And in fact, it really makes a difference if you sit down with that graphic organizer and you actually use that organizer so you can put information. There's nothing quite like going into a class, well, we're going to do something new today, and not really knowing all the ins and outs of it. And it's important too that students understand, just like we talked a few minutes ago about, oh, this is just an additional activity. No, we got to explain to them the purpose for it and why we're going to use this. What are they going to get out of this? Then it becomes a matter of presenting that organizer, but we have to do more than that. We have to model the use of it, because students can't just be expected to, one glimpse at this and I know how to do it. As the instructor, you model the use of that graphic organizer and you make your thinking visible. They need to understand how you approach it. And that means you're going to be talking. You're going to be talking about why you're doing certain things that you're doing so students can understand. Then you have students actually work with you and assist in completing a graphic organizer. Now, it may seem like a lot of, at this point, you're going, this is a lot of stuff to do as I'm working through this. But students are learning. They learn from you as you model. They learn some more as you help them, or they help you in putting it together. And then finally, they work on it together, maybe as a group, or maybe you actually have them do one on their own. But they've moved through the process and have a better understanding of what that graphic organizer is helping them to do. You can't just do a one and done when it comes to graphic organizers. They really need to be a part. And at that point, you can go through and review students' work, and it really opens up an opportunity for you to have some pretty good classroom discussions going on about how did it work? What do you think about it? Did we get the information out of this that we wanted to? So again, it's more than just this neat little graphic that's sitting on a page in terms of looking at all this. So,
Susan, I wanted to call our participants' attention to the fact that you just, in those last three steps, you just encapsulated the whole idea behind scaffolding. Reducing their dependence on the teacher driving and then beginning to take over their own responsibility for driving the process at the individual level. And that is, that the practice part of it is an essential part of the student learning. They can't master it unless they practice it.
Well, I didn't know I was going to go that far with it, but thank you for the kudos on that one. But no, Daphne's right. We have, so many things that we try to do in our classrooms. We have a limited time. Our students, they want to get in and take that test as soon as possible, but they really need an opportunity to truly learn. And that learning can't be superficial. It has to go further than that. And so being able to scaffold and take your time, better to spend a little more time on certain things than, to try to rush through a whole bunch of different things that students are going to forget very easily. So, Daphne, you're absolutely right. And our students, they need that opportunity to see that sometimes it takes a little time to do things. And so as we're working through, I just want to mention one thing to each of you as you're out there now. If you want the handouts, they are all posted underneath the handouts tab, and you can grab those. We have a whole bunch of graphic organizers that we're going to show you, and we also have the presentation. So you can certainly get those and just download them to your computer as we're going through if you want to do that. But you'll have all of this information. So let's start with RLA, and we'll talk just a little bit about why we need to really why it's essential that we use some graphic organizers in RLA. Daphne brought this up a little while ago. Students don't always have a process or a structure for doing certain things. We've talked in the past about how we have these students who are basically, kind of cold writers. They just start writing. They're not doing a lot of different things with it. They just plunge right on in. Well, we know what results from that. It's not very effective writing because our students need a step-by-step structure. So if we can turn around and we can use a graphic organizer in RLA so that we give them that structure, then that's going to help them in that whole process as they work through and they end up with that final form that's there. The other thing is that, again, when it comes to reading, our students often, as Daphne made a comment, they think everything's important on a given page. So if you ask them to highlight, they'll highlight everything that's there. We have to give them those tools. So as Daphne mentioned it, they filter that information, they analyze and they evaluate the text that they're reading. And when they do that, they can begin to see those relationships. And the graphic organizer allows them to do that. So at that point, and especially when we start talking about extended response, you've got some ability there once you've analyzed and evaluated to do some decision making. You can also classify information and then you can communicate that back again. But overall, that graphic organizer in RLA, depending on what you use at what point, it really comes about that the students have a better understanding of what they're reading. And if that happens to be literary text, it may be the traits of a character, what the plot is, or even coming to a conclusion about a theme for whatever that story is. So those are things that are so important as we're moving through. So we've talked a lot now, so we're going to ask you to do something for us. You have on the little panel on the right-hand side, you have a question box. And this is our question for you. What is your favorite type of graphic organizer to use when you're teaching reading and writing skills in your GED classroom? And if you'll just type in a few little things there, we'll talk about the different types of graphic organizers that you use. So what is your favorite type of graphic organizer when you're working on reading and writing skills? And as I look through this, I see KWL, great, because those are different things that are very good as well. A T-chart, as we're working with students, sometimes that T-chart can be such a simple thing, but it can provide so much information. Venn diagrams, sure, when you're comparing and contrasting information. We also have, sequence organizers. Absolutely. Think about the questions that people have. There's a sample question from the item sampler that talks about the sequence of events that occurred within a story. And so that's another one that's there. I do see one that we'll refer to in just a few minutes, Both Sides Now, and we'll talk about that. Randy has conceptual bubble organizers, so you can look at and see how everything is related to each other. Lots of T-charts that are going on and idea webs. So those are some of the things that you're using at this point. And, there are lots of different types of organizers that are out there. But we're going to talk about one of our favorites, and that's called Both Sides Now. So, Daphne, you want to talk a little bit about this one and why it's one of our favorites?
Oh, we love this one. One of the things about constructive response that we know students tend to want to do is they want to read the passage, they want to pick a side, and then they want to go cherry pick the evidence. And by doing it that way, it increases the possibility that they're really looking for a point of view that agrees with their own. And that isn't the purpose behind constructive response. what both sides now effectively does is it helps students to interact with the text, because you can't fill out this graphic organizer unless you do. And it actually takes it out of a more subjective approach by helping them to plan their response by listing the evidence that supports, listing the evidence that opposes, then asking a couple of evaluative questions, and then finally, not first, finally selecting the position that is better supported. And they also have to deal with the why. I mean, this is golden in terms of how it helps students. It reinforces a structured approach rather than the approach that Susan mentioned, which many do, is they just start writing. Okay, so this is a both sides now example that is actually built from one of the resource guide stimulus materials. It's called Revenue and Taxation, and it first provides the evidence that supports that the building of the new road is beneficial. And then there is the evidence that opposes, which provides the other perspective. And one of the things that's great about this is that it highlights what we've been telling you in professional development, that there isn't a right answer in terms of a side. There's really only good argumentation and effective support. And I think that the upside to this particular graphic organizer is it does a great job of pulling students into engaging in the kind of thinking that gets them there. Okay, Susan. Is your mouse okay.
But you know, we have a whole bunch more than this. I mean, I know many of you may say, oh, but that's just one, and maybe I'm not even yet working at that kind of GED level. I'm not quite ready for that yet. As Daphne said, both sides now is probably one of the best graphic organizers I have ever seen for doing a constructed response. But there are others, and there are a lot of others. And so you can have everything from tip, which is basically how you preview text, all the way down through question the author and trying to understand the author's purpose in things. There's so many different ones. And one thing that we have done, and one of the things you'll see as we go in a little bit over to the workbook that goes along this, we've provided you a number of these different things. But we've also provided some of these in the past. And so keep in mind that, we archive all of these Tuesday for Teachers. And so you can go back in and you can, if you have a question about exactly how does that work, you can actually go back in and review those, plus pull down those materials and use them. We have put quite an emphasis into both the reading side and the writing, and then putting it all together in terms of crafting those constructed responses. So keep those things in mind, because you'll see a number of different types of graphic organizers that are included. And, we'll say thank you to Bonnie at this point, because she went back through these things to look and actually see, well, what kind of organizers were in these different webinars that we had done. And so those are all in italics as you go through and you take a look at these. So,
and also, Susan, the other beautiful thing about this is some of those organizers, for those of you who have students that are not yet at the GED or high school equivalency level, they will give you a way to help students build the skills to get them there. And that's the purpose behind the wide array and the organizers for pretty much each step in the process. So that part, do take advantage of those because they can be quite helpful.
And Daphne, you bring up a really good point. Um, because as we're working in our classrooms, it's rare that any of us have an opportunity to just have GED level students. We have a mix of students. We have A, B, E, and we have maybe even literacy level students, all the way up to GED in many of our classrooms. Sometimes it's the one room schoolhouse, and so when you're looking at this, how do you structure that? Your instruction so that everybody can take part in it. And these graphic organizers can be that very thing where students are doing, focusing in on specific things, and you use that graphic organizer as a group. So those are things that we can do, and the only thing that would be different from this would be the level of the text that you use for students as they're reading. So, and the product that they write at the end. So there's so many different ways that you can structure this. So don't think about, well, I just have to wait till this is my higher level students. Let's start with them at earlier levels so that we can pull it all through. And then let's talk a little bit about social studies, because social studies lends itself, just like science does, to the use of a number of different types of graphic organizers. And when we're looking at graphic organizers in social studies, what we're trying to do is we're helping our students focus. There's so many things within social studies where we're dealing with cause and effect relationships. We may have compare and contrast relationships, but those are things that our students often struggle with. And the other thing is about, how do I chunk this information so that students can take it in rather than overwhelming them with information where they'll just, shut down. So it's another good way to do this. But the other thing too, and we've talked quite a bit about the importance of using primary and secondary sources when we look at social studies. Those primary sources can be challenging for students, and so when it comes to understanding them, using a graphic organizer may be one of your most effective tools that you can use so that they can go back and identify that important information. So we'll ask the question again. So those of you who are teaching social studies in your classroom, what is your favorite type of graphic organizer when you're teaching social studies? And just go ahead and chat and write some things down in the question box, and we'll talk about a few of those. Oh, Penny, absolutely, a timeline. So many, our students don't always have an opportunity to work with timelines, and that's a great thing for them to begin to see that sequence, how things occur over a certain period of time. So any of those can work really, really well in working with students. Somebody else.
I see a lot of people using timelines. There's a compare and contrast.
And we have our Venn diagram again, because that's another thing. But I like the idea, Connie, of a flow chart where students can see how things, work in that, maybe in a sequence, but also how they all relate together and working with that. So some good ideas that you have as you're working through each of these. So let's talk about some that we've used in working with the GED social studies. One of our favorites happens to be reading like a historian, and that deals with 3 C's and an S. And what do I mean by that? Well, I'm talking about, first of all, looking at the source of a text. Because as I'm reading the text, I need to know, you know, who wrote this and why did that person write that? The other thing is I've got to be able to put it into context. So that's my first C, contextualization, because I have to look at what all was happening at that particular point in time and how does all of this relate together. And then I better do a close reading when it comes to history and looking at those because they may have some unfamiliar terms, but I have to really see what that document is actually telling me as I'm moving through. And then, you know, history is about points of view. So, what kind of corroboration is there? Are there sources? Are there other sources that say something similar to that? So, yes, that particular one is not the graphic organizer, but let's look over here. And we have a list of questions. If you look on the right hand side, sourcing, who made this source? Where did it come from? And then imagining the setting around this particular document. How would that world or that period of time be different from our own? And what does that tell you? So then you're looking at a brief list of the details itself. And is there some corroboration? Does this document tell you something new? Or does it reinforce what you already knew? Or maybe it actually contradicts. So that brings us down to that evaluation piece, which is a little bit separate from this. That did it change your opinion, and why or why not? So there's two different graphic organizers here: examine, think, draw conclusions, and questions. And notice how these arrows are going multiple ways so that, you know, this is not just, oh, I complete the cycle and I'm done, but it actually opens up for more and more questions. And that's what we want our effective readers to do, is to be able to answer those questions as they're moving through. So there are a number of different tools that you can use. There's some great resources that are out there. And especially, you know, if you look at the National Archives, they have, our Library of Congress has tremendous resource materials and graphic organizers that can be used for a number of different things. So we can look at things. We had some webinars that have dealt with things in social studies. And notice what we have here. We have the read like a historian. We have the 3 reads. And we'll talk more about that as we go through. And looking at how text is organized, that also can give us some clues as we're working through within those different things. So keep those in mind as you're going through, because again, one graphic organizer may not work across all different content areas, but look at what can have the greatest value for you. So, Daphne, how about talking a little bit about science and graphic organizers for that?
Okay, science is another one of the content areas that is very well suited for the use of graphical organizers. You know, we've been talking all along about the connection between ideas, and it certainly can be used to facilitate making the interrelatedness visible to students. Let's not forget that we often have a number of visual learners in the adult ed classroom, and that a picture is really worth 1,000 words for those folks. And it can also help to make abstract concepts more concrete, as well as, you know, focusing and structuring the vocabulary so that it becomes a natural part of the student's interaction with the content area. And as we've also been talking for the other 3 content areas that we have covered, it provides really a structure for the information and the processes. Again, you know, students often have the notion that structure has to be boring and confining, but actually, done right, structure can be incredibly liberating. So, part of the education process is to get our learners to really understand that.
And one thing that I am doing, Daphne, as I'm going through here, I'm sending out a note to everybody that if you have any questions as we go through, please don't feel like you have to just wait to the end in order to ask those because we are monitoring them as we're going
Yep.
through. So, it may be something that a lot of other people have some concerns about. So, please feel free to jump right in and ask your question. And
Right.
we need to know, Daphne, what are they using in
What
science?
are
Is
you
there a
using?
graphic organizer that you like?
Yeah. What are you using in the science classroom in the way of graphical organizers? Oh, I see flowchart. Yay. Okay.
And I see from Rosemary that she uses Inspiration software to actually create graphic organizers. That's very good. I'm glad to hear
It's,
that.
okay. I see KNWS on there. Process maps, absolutely. All I will say is scientific method. I also see some compare and contrast,
Mhm.
cause and effect. That's one of the things that a lot of our adult education students really struggle with being able to, both identify and analyze. Timeline for experiments.
Okay, so Daphne, you want to talk about one of our favorites for science?
Yeah. Um, this is one. Remember that the concern I think that many of you had when we took the science short answers um, off the docket for 2018 science exams. But one of the things we're still doing is we're still assessing students' knowledge base on scientific investigation. We're just using a different set of items or question types to get at that. So in the science classroom, it's still really important for students to be able to actually execute these steps, stating a hypothesis, designing an experiment, focusing in on data collection, because without data collection, you don't actually have anything to draw conclusions from. So this particular graphic organizer breaks down the steps. Okay, so they don't have to memorize it, but actually it flows in a logical sequence. It also helps to organize the information that's actually needed for an experiment. And the great news about this one is it's particularly versatile. It can be used with hands-on experiments, which you can do in the adult ed classroom without a big, fancy, elaborate lab. It also helps with examining and analyzing scenarios or even source text information. So this is, again, an exercise in structured thinking. It will help students to begin to not see every single word on the page as important, but that some words on the page and some concepts on the page have, primary importance as opposed to others which may have an important but supporting role. Okay, Susan, you want to run through the example?
Well, and this we just provided so that you could go back and use that graphic organizer and have students set up an experiment, to design an experiment for the scenario that we have here. And think about all the things that you're going to learn from that as you go through. You're going to know whether students can recognize the difference between independent and dependent variables, that they know
Yep.
the difference between a control group and an experimental group, but also, that they really understand that scientific method and that process that you use to move step by step through there. So if they encounter something on the test, that gives them a scenario that includes information in there that has the independent, dependent variable, they're not going to have difficulty deciding which thing is which. They may not have to write a short answer with this, but they're going to have to answer questions about it. So this is the type of thing that you can do with students to get them understanding the process. Just because that extended response question is not there, or excuse me, the short answer question is not there, doesn't mean that students aren't going to need all those component parts and have that understanding. So we have a number of different graphic organizers. There are lots of different things that are included. That scientific method flow chart. There's different types of graphs that students might need to use. Also, question and answer relationships. Those are all things that can make a big difference. Now, do we have those? Absolutely. In fact, if we look all the way back to May of 2015, you can see that there are a number of different things that would apply, and you would be able to pull information from those. December 2016, we actually did a Taking the Struggle Out of Science. And even though, yes, there's something there for constructed response, it's still something that you can use to help students understand the process. And who knows, if they can write about it, they can certainly read and answer questions. Those are the things that we want our students to be able to do. And then we've got one more thing, and then after we go through mathematical reasoning, we're going to go back and then take a look at some of the things in the actual workbook that we have, the resource guide that we have for you, so that you can see some things that we approve, all of them, in terms of we like them, they work well with students, but we also want to look at it, kind of from a standpoint of how it works with students in different content areas. So to talk about mathematical reasoning, many of our students struggle with problem solving because they don't quite understand the process. They don't necessarily take it in an order that they should. They may see information that's in there that isn't important and try to factor it in. All of us have had the students who, if there are 5 numbers in a problem and you only need 3 of them, they're going to use all 5 because if the number's there, it has to be important. And so we have to help our students get past that type of problem and those issues. The other thing is the graphic organizer can make a difference in terms of vocabulary. I mean, sometimes our students don't recognize when certain words are important and what they mean, what they're trying to tell the student to do when they're trying to solve a problem. Graphic organizers can also impact that spatial arrangement, how we order things. And back to where we started very early on, it's about being able to take something that's very abstract and move it through so that you can look at it in a more concrete way. So I'll ask the question one more time and have you write it. What is your favorite type of graphic organizer to use when teaching math skills? Math skills this time. And boy, I had things popping in very fast. The solve organizer. Puglia method, where George Puglia, where we have that method for problem solving, those 4 steps as you move through. Tables. Or just being able to organize information can make a huge difference in working through. Unpack, where you actually go in and I'm assuming you unpack what problem. What is that problem telling me? Just like we unpack the the prompt when we're talking about extended response. Um, those types of things. We need to do the same thing with a word problem. And Rhonda, welcome to teaching. I'm glad to see that we have a newbie here. Um, Being organized helps, and using graphic organizers can help a lot in doing that as you're a new teacher coming in. But we're glad to have you. And anybody else who's a newbie out there as well, we're always grateful to have you join in the ranks.
Welcome.
And Charles, I use word problems to promote critical thinking. And the Frayer models, which is a graphic organizer, looking at back at that graphic at the math vocabulary. Those are all really good processes and that you're using, as well as graphic organizers that you're working with. Again, it comes down to having practice with many different things. But we're going to share one with you that is a favorite of ours, and it's called Goals and Givens. Now, this one is a little long. I will tell you that up front. But when students can actually go through and work with this, what they do find over time is it really makes you be an active reader, and it really gets you into a thinking routine. So let's talk a little bit about what it actually does. At the top, there is a question there. It says the goal. What is the question? And sometimes our students don't even know what the question is asking them to do. So we want to identify that first. But the other thing is that we want them to read that problem closely, because the givens, or that really comes down to the important details, the information that's been provided, and we can put all that information together. Those two pieces are essential to moving on and solving that problem, because you've determined, this is my question, this is what I have to answer, and these are the things that I'm going to use in order to answer it. But one of the things I like so much about this particular one is it gives them an opportunity to look at different strategies. One of the things that we find consistently with students when it comes to math and solving problems is they don't have a variety of math strategies to use to solve a problem. What this graphic organizer does is it lists some different ones. So maybe you weren't thinking about using a table with this, but this, all of a sudden you see it written there and go, oh yeah, I could do that. Or that you could draw something out. It's a nice visual reminder for students. And then you're looking at a conjecture. So you're going to predict. What's your answer going to be? You're making a prediction. You haven't gone there yet, but now you're going to go through and actually do the solution, and you can see all those different steps. The other thing that this does is it does provide an opportunity for students to really explain their answer and why it's appropriate and verify that. How do you know it's right? Is it in the correct units? Did you answer the goal? So this is something that students don't need to use it for every single problem that they do, but just getting into that habit of having this process can make a big difference. So let's take a look just very quickly. And I've just pulled the very top pieces from Goals and Givens so that you could take a look at it. And we have a problem here. And the problem is that we have M&Ms, and there's 96 pieces, and we have 3 colors. We know something from here. Our givens are that we have 96 pieces, we have 3 colors, we have 2 times the red equals the blue, and 5 times the blue equals the yellow. And our goal is to find out how many M&Ms of each color in the back. Now, my students, many times they would have read the problem and they would have said, I don't know how to do that, because they would get all caught up in just the verbiage of the problem. But here we've sorted out our information. And now that Goals and Givens says, okay, what strategies will you use? And one thing we recommend for students is pick 2, at least 2. In this case, I said, okay, I could make a table or I could write an equation. Now, from that, I can move over and I can actually solve it. What I've done by picking two is I have a way to assess whether my answer is correct. Did I get the same thing from both sides of this? Those are the things that I want to do. But I wouldn't be able to do this equation if I hadn't gone back and identified my givens so that I knew some very specific information in moving through. Again, as I said earlier, this one is a little more involved, but when you're working with students through the process of really becoming strong problem solvers, it's worth your time in taking students through this so that they too begin to have a process as they're working through. So we have graphic organizers listed. Some of you have mentioned different ones that are that we actually have included, and then we have where to find them. We have done a number of different webinars that get back into working with math, problem solving, and different thinking processes. Those are the types of things that we want to do, so we've included that information there as well. So, Daphne, if I could ask you just to do, before we go into answering some questions, if you would do just a little recap for us.
Okay. One, I would be delighted to. I hope that in the last hour, we've given you a sufficient rationale if you're not using graphic organizers to at least try them. And if you are using them already, to keep using them and maybe think about adding a few more to your tool chest. They are excellent tools in terms of jump-starting critical and creative thinking. It's kind of counterintuitive because people think, oh, they've got to be confining and they've got to be, cramp people's style in terms of creativity. Actually, no. It actually helps people in many instances be more creative, to expand the possibilities for solutions, just as Susan demonstrated with the goals and givens one. It's incredibly useful for organizing information. We've made several references. We don't have to tell you how easily students can be distracted by really what constitutes too much information. This gives them a hierarchy to begin to organize that information. And the corollary to that is understanding the information presented and the relationships between those bits and pieces of information. We move beyond really kind of a rote approach to thinking to a knowledge-based and an understanding-based approach to a particular content area. It also gives students some important insights. I mean, I think that students and individuals really often lose sight of how they learn and how bringing how they learn to a learning task is really important. And these certainly give both you and the students in your classroom the opportunity to optimize learning, and to actually, which is important for adult learners, to allow them to step into the responsibility for owning their own learning. And as well as we've demonstrated, there are graphic organizers for every discipline. And it just gets better because it helps people really optimize their higher order thinking skills. So, Susan, where do we go from here?
Well, there are a couple of things. One, we mentioned it before, but we'll recap this. You've got to model for students how to use these organizers. And, there's one thing here with students is please don't make them write complete sentences when filling things in. this is about getting ideas down, and we're not going to worry right now about whether I can capitalize and punctuate and all that kind of stuff. I just want to make sure I've got my notes coming down into that. Now, you may have a good reason for it on certain things. That's fine. But generally speaking, no. Um, Sometimes for really complex material, you may want to generate that organizer yourself, so students can follow along, or maybe you partially complete it so that students then are kind of filling in the different blanks, but you've given them some help. And that is something that, especially if you're working with much more complex information, um, color outside the lines. Students love to doodle. That's okay. They can doodle all over their graphic organizer. They may have little things out to the side. The main thing is that students, they do have that structure and they do have that ability to work within it. And, one graphic organizer doesn't necessarily work for every student. So you may find that sometimes that students may struggle with, while a couple of students may be doing just fine with a graphic organizer, but someone sitting over there is just struggling with it. So maybe you need to find something that's a little different for that particular student. So that's just a few little things. And so what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to move over and I'm going to open up
The workbook.
I'm going to open up the workbook. I just have to move this down a little bit. And where is my workbook? There it is. This is what we have provided for you in terms of looking at different information that's out there, and I want to make sure that you can see this as fully as possible. There we go. As you can see, there are a lot of graphic organizers included in here. um, 70 pages worth. But what we wanted to do is provide you with something that you can have some time to go through, look at the different things that are included here, and as you work with these, we'll go through and highlight just a couple of them. I mentioned TIP earlier. One of the things students don't do is they don't preview information. If there is one thing that could really help your ABE students, in all of them, is actually to get that previewing going. And that's one of the things that we have here. As we also look at this, and I need to move that just a little bit here, because I know we want to get to some questions. I'm going to pull right back up here again. We have some sample completed organizers. You see both sides now is included. There's an organizer dealing with pros and cons. We have something that deals with thesis and claims. There's some frames for that. And then if you take a look down through here, there's some things that we've mentioned, like questioning the author or reading between the lines, all of those different materials that are included in here. And one I want to refer you over to is this particular chart is very helpful for students. It may be something you want to give to students where they can come back and they can look at this, because understanding text structure can make a huge difference for students in being able to understand the text that they're doing. And this addresses many of those areas that you have been talking about before, sequence, compare, contrast, cause and effect, those types of things. So there's a number of different ones that are included here. And let me go. I don't want to make everybody dizzy, but I know I probably am. I had somebody who asked just a little while ago about a tool to use for social studies, someone who is brand new to teaching social studies. And this is from the Library of Congress. It is an excellent source for being able to analyze primary sources, where students observe, reflect, and question. And if there's one that I would really recommend for someone who's new in the process with this, it's that particular one. And this just gives you a view of it as we're working through. So we have a couple questions, and I know that it is a little bit after 4:30, so I want to try to go to some of these. Um, in talking, Terry has come up with, my students still have a problem with looking at the math scenario before they get to the math part. And Terry, you're absolutely right. Our students, they're just looking at numbers. They're not looking at what the problem is saying. So that's just a matter of working with them. I think you'll find that goals and givens
Yep.
will really help them, because it forces them in order to look at the scenario provided as opposed to just getting down to the math. And
Right.
Daphne, one of the comments from Mary Bacon is that, did you say that the Tuesdays for Teachers are archived? Where are they?
Yes, yes, they are. If you actually, if you go to the Educator tab, and you look at the bottom of the column, it says Webinar Archive. And all you have to do is click there, and there is a treasure trove, as Susan and I have been saying, of webinars. Every webinar that we've done is recorded, so you can download the recording or either listen to it at that point in time. You can also download the PowerPoint deck and any resource guides, and most of them did have resource guides like today to go with them. And those are available 24/7. So, if you can't join us live, our attitude was we wanted to make it available to you regardless of whether you could fit this into your schedule. So, yes, they're all archived.
And just so you know, I was able to pull up the GED Testing Service website. And as Daphne said, for those of you who are very visual, if you go to
Yes.
the For Educators tab, look at the bottom right here where it says Webinars, and there they are. So
There they
all the
are.
different pieces that you would want, and you notice they're all set up by date, and you have the title, webinar slides, you have the video that's included in there as well. And for those of you who are looking for a certificate of completion,
Yes.
there's your certificate that's included as well.
Yeah.
Let's see here. We have a couple of comments from Amy. Before I jump into reading skills, I start with a lesson on text structure, and we practice identifying different ones and then using an appropriate graphic organizer. Amy, that
Yeah.
is absolutely wonderful to hear that, because that is what students need. They need to be able to recognize what is something, why is this cause and effect, and this is a sequence. Where are my key words? What's telling me that? So great job on that.
Yep.
When is the next live webinar, and how often are these Tuesdays for teachers?
We do
Daphne?
them. We do them every other month. So the next one will be in June. We did one in February. Then we're going to take a little bit of a pause for the summer, and then we will restart them in the fall. The best way to get an alert is to subscribe to In Session, because you will also get notification of the upcoming webinars, because we announce them that way. So if you are not an In Session subscriber, we don't spam you. So don't be afraid to sign up that you're going to sign up to get 200 emails from us a week, because that doesn't happen. But you will get invites to Tuesdays for Teachers if you are an In Session subscriber. So if I can make a pitch for that, you do want to do that, as well as getting the invite to Tuesdays for Teachers. You also will get the latest news about the tests that impact you as instructors. So it's a twofer as in terms of value. So if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. There are a million places on the website that you can click the subscribe button and become a subscriber. That will guarantee you won't miss a single Tuesdays for Teachers.
Very good. And what we're going to do is, I will tell you, June 26th, put that on your calendar. It's a great day. It's my birthday. So, yay! So those are the kinds of things, just sharing a little bit more information than you really needed to know. But, okay, so we also have Jean Perini. Hey, Jean, hope everything's going well with you. Using graphics also help the math student who tends to skip words because they're reading too fast.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Thereby not understanding the question. It helps them review. Jean, absolutely correct on that. That is something that that our students do have difficulty with as they're going through. They have difficulty in trying to, and I'm trying to get my screen to unpause here so that it'll come back to the right one. But they do have difficulty because they try to read things too quickly. And do we have any others? Any other questions?
Well, Susan, we want to remind everybody, if you've not already done so, the materials are available under the Handouts tab on the right-hand side of the screen. There are 3 of them. If you don't or haven't done that yet, don't worry. You can actually go to the webinar archive and download the materials from there as well.
Excellent. So,
one more, 2 things actually before we wrap up. I want to remind everybody that GED Testing Service has its annual conference coming up in San Diego, and that registration for the conference is still open. And for those of you who are interested in a higher level of service to your colleagues and the rest of the field and your students, we are also still taking applications for our Train the Trainer Institute. Jean is on the phone. She was part of our Train the Trainer Institute and is a veteran trainer now, and there are probably others of you as well. You can find out more about that at our website. But if you're not interested, but you know someone else who might be interested in Train the Trainer, by all means, have them go to our website and find out more about the program. And it will be offered as a pre-conference to the main conference.
and I will tell you that we're going to have quite the PD track at that conference. For those of you who are able to come in, we have quite a few different sessions that will be included across all the content areas. So if you're able to join us in sunny San Diego, that would be absolutely wonderful. But, if you're not, you can make sure that you click in for our Tuesdays for Teachers. Another thing is, if you have questions, you get through all this and you have some questions, know that you can always communicate with GEDTS, that you just can use communications@gedtestingservice.com. That's one way in order to do that. And, make sure that, as Daphne said earlier, you want to be involved with in session so that you're getting some of the last and the latest and greatest information that is coming through. So I'll ask the question if there's anything else, any other questions that we have out there.
Happy to answer them. And also, Susan, I want to make sure everybody knows that communications@gedtestingservice.com mailbox is a monitored mailbox. So you are not sending your questions into the void. They actually will be forwarded to the PD team, and someone, probably myself or Debbie Fawcett, will get you an answer to your question. So don't be hesitant about using this mailbox. We are quite serious about taking your questions and getting you answers.
And I have a note here from Charles that says, "This was my first session with you, and I truly appreciate and enjoy what you're doing. Thank you." Charles, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Another newbie in the group. You may not be a new teacher, but you're new to our sessions, and we're certainly glad to have you here, just as we're glad to have everyone. So I will say thank you so much for spending your time this afternoon with us. We really do appreciate that. And we appreciate everything that you do for students, that you do for your communities as well as you work as an adult educator. So thank you so very much. And Daphne, I'll let you have the last word.
Okay, well, I mean, after that, I can't really top that. And so I want to add my thanks, and on behalf of GED Testing Service, to also thank you, because we do have a lot of visibility into the work you do and how important it is. And it is our pleasure to bring you this program, and we hope that you will join us in June for the next installment of Tuesdays for Teachers. Have a great afternoon.